Hey everyone, welcome back to the Pedalboard building series. The first video was an overview, just my rig and showing you the ins and outs of that and my pedals and why I chose to do some things. The second video was all the parts that I use to build pedal boards, from tools to cables to plugs. So if you haven't checked out those videos yet, check those out. But if you're here just for the soldering, then this video is for you. So the first thing that we're gonna do in this video is show you how to solder an SP400 Squareplugs plug with the BTPA CA-0678 cable. Lots of words and numbers. So let's dive right in on how to solder this kind of cable. So first, easy enough, put it in the vise and unscrew. Set these somewhere where you can keep them. These roll off the table super easy. I'm not gonna follow my own advice, but sometimes you put them in a tray or some sort of magnetic thing or whatever to hold it. So open that up there. Now for the cable, what we're gonna wanna do is make a clean cut. So again, in my tool video, I talked about these tools. I love these because they create a nice clean cut, flush cut, and super sharp, and makes it nice and flat. That just makes everything easier to work with. So for these cables, you're going to want to leave the black sleeve on this up until kind of right as it dips into that pool there, that space. So we're going to want to trim it about right there. Just kind of put your thumb there. And these strippers work all right for this. And so just go on the biggest setting and clamp down and pull away. Now, this particular cable takes a little bit longer to make because it's braided like this. And so there's a couple tricks though that come in handy when working with this cable. And like I said before, that these tweezers really help. My other video I kind of described that a little bit. So the first step you would do to kind of undo this braid is just take these tweezers, kind of put them together, and just kind of comb them through this braid. So you're almost treating your tweezers like a comb, and you're just going through. Now those particular strippers kind of took off a little bit of the braid. That is totally okay, and actually I kind of prefer that. They also nicked this black outer shielding, which is totally okay. I should say that's it's an inner shielding. It's there's two layers to it. So it actually took off quite a bit of that copper braid, but that's okay. Again, we don't mind that. So we're going to do that. If for some reason this doesn't work, that's where this comes in handy, this brush. You can literally brush out that braid, and then these copper strands become really straight. So this is the first plug we're doing, and so I'm not going to worry too much about the orientation of this copper braid, but when you wire your second plug, you really want to pay attention to the direction that this lays. And I might describe that a little bit later as we go on. But for now, so pull the outer shielding to one side. Now you're left with this wire on the inside with this black piece. You want to actually take this black off, so because that is conductive. And so just kind of go in your stripper, whatever one gives you that. So I took this off. So you can see this is just kind of like an extra outer coating on that inner white wire that you don't need. So that can come off. And then you only need a little bit of that tip poking out right there. So what you're going to want to do on both of these, you're going to want to twist them like this, and then twist the outer braid here. So I only, trimmed off, about a 1/2 inch or so. You don't need a lot. Now, when you're twisting, make sure, especially because some of these braids kind of frayed a little bit and started to come off, you want to make sure you get all these little frays and get rid of them, or else one tiny little piece of, braid might connect So you want to avoid that. So get it all out like this. Now on these plugs, this one here is the ground, and this one here is the tip. So I'm going to pre-solder these. I'm going to tin them. Essentially, this is where my kind of helping hands come in. So I'm going to hold them in place right there and take my solder. This is a fresh, I haven't soldered anything yet with this. I just turned it on. And so I'm going to tin it. And then I'm going to scrape it. Make sure it's nice and shiny and clean. And hold it down on the tip lug. Feed the solder in until it covers that hole. And until I can see it kind of sweat down or kind of bleed down. It kind of sucks up the solder and you can kind of see it flow a little bit. So I'm going to do that to both contacts here. Both the ground and the tip. Okay. And then the same thing with the cable. I'm just going to tin it. So you can see it maybe a little bit better like that. So just get some solder on the very ends of these. Okay, so now it's ready to go. So what you want to do is kind of make a Y with this. Space them out like so. Now this cable, it's not wanting to spin, so it does. Cables do have a preferred direction, so I'm gonna I kind of undid all the cable down there. Now it's kind of going a little freer. If you're ever having trouble, you can always use these, you know, the helping hands and then clip them like that. But in this case, I don't really need to. But there's some spots where you might. So if you lay this down right here like this, you can see that this black outer sleeve goes almost to the end there, and these two line up pretty good. Now because they're already pre-soldered, all you have to do is take your soldering iron, press down, and make sure that both sides, the wire and the contact, melt, and make sure as much as you can that there's a mechanical connection as well, so that the wire is physically touching the contact. You don't want just the solder to be holding it together, or the solder to be the connection point. You want the wire to actually be touching. So press down until you can tell that the wire is actually hitting that metal lug. So on the outer shielding, you can kind of push down and then slowly with your soldering iron back it up, and you're kind of bringing that solder back down or up the wire, if you will, and it kind of creates this, you know, a stiffness to this wire if you drag it, and gets rid of the extra solder and it doesn't bubble up or anything. So that is a pretty darn good connection right there. What I might do, just because, is take my snips and this little extra ground, just snip it off there. And if any of the solder maybe bubbled up, you can take your pliers, you know, there's this little piece right there, and just get it all out of there. Just blow on it, blow away any of the excess. But that would work really well. So just push this down and screw it back on. You obviously want to make sure that this stays on. This protects that tip from hitting the outside, so definitely this is important. So fold that down. Screws can be a little difficult to work with, but sometimes it helps if you just put it in your screwdriver first, then guide it in. So put it in your, it's not magnetic, but you kind of just leave it on your finger and guide it in the hole. Tighten it down all the way. With these, you don't have to go crazy. Don't over tighten. But there is a soldered SP400 with the BTPA 0678 cable. So I mentioned before that these cables kind of have a preferred direction that they go in. And so you have to be, as you're wiring these, just to make, you know, not to eliminate kinks out of this wire and stuff, and to make sure it's wired as cleanly as possible. You're going to want to kind of dry fit the plug first. And so let me demonstrate that. So I'm going to take out the screws to this guy. And then I'm going to put it in the left input, because that's where this lead is going to go. Kind of open it up and look at it. So this cable is going to come in like this and do this. So all of my cables, I just kind of keep the same format. I wire them up and to the right, if you're looking from the back like this. And so this cable is going to come in up from the bottom. It's being wired from the HX stomp all the way here, the left out of that to the left end of here. So I want to give some slack. So I'm going to push this down a little bit. Just make sure I have enough slack. Hate to run out of space, you know, in a situation like this. So I'll just push some extra wire back there. I'm not too worried about it being insanely clean. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to bring it down like this. I'm going to estimate that this needs to be cut right there. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut it right there. Nice flat, clean cut. Okay. So now I know that this needs to go right here. So when I strip this plug, I'm going to make sure I comb the braids this direction and leave the tip that direction. Does that make sense? So that when this plug goes in, the cable's kind of natural resting spot will be where it needs to go. So, for example, you can kind of, now we can kind of pull out the slack like this and strip this guy. And again, about a ½ inch or so. Okay, so now we can see the braid. And again, I'm going to kind of unbraid it, either like this or with this. So you can use the brush if you want. And you can see the brush actually kind of helps pick up and, you know, dispose of any of the loose braids, loose strands that I may have accidentally cut when I was stripping it. So this can kind of be helpful. The tweezers can do it too, but this does a little bit extra. So I want to make sure all the frays are straight and they're all, you know, all the broken ones are out of the way. So now that we have it like this, we could kind of dry fit it again. Come in like this, it's going to come in and go like that. So I'm going to want the braids to go that way. So where I part the hair, essentially, is on this side. And I want it to head in this direction. So that way, when I wire it up, it'll be like that. So like I said before, when I'm wiring the board, I'm always putting Deoxit in. And so every time I make a connection, just spring a tiny little bit in each jack. You can just kind of wipe up the residue, or it's not going to ruin the finish on your pedals. I've done this to almost all my pedals now, and it's been totally fine. And then again, just working the jack 10 to 12 times. These Strymons are super easy, they just glide in, but not every pedal is like that, and that's okay. Some jacks are made differently. But just work them all in and out, and that makes sure that both the plug and the contacts kind of breaks up any oxidation that's on there. I do it to the MIDI plugs too. I've already done it to those, but any connection point. All right, so the next thing I have to do on my pedal board is I have to wire the return from my trifecta back into loop number 5, so the return of loop number 5. So essentially I have to make a stereo to dual mono cable. So I'm going to use these SP550-S plugs, at least one of them, and then the other two are going to be SP400s. So just for the sake of kind of showing you an example, I'm going to use an old, I think this is actually a MIDI cable that I'm not using anymore. And we're going to desolder it just to kind of show you an example of how to reuse a plug real quick before I show you how to wire one up. Reusing these is essential because they're expensive. They're, I don't know, $5, $6 a piece or something like that. So first thing you got to do is just take off the old wiring. So I'll just hold it with my tweezers, put the iron to the contacts, lift. Easy, right? Lift and lift. Now, this particular one, I don't know, it could be a little old, could be a few years old. The solder is probably not the freshest, so it might be a good idea to start clean and get rid of all the junk that's in there. And so that's what the desoldering braid is for. And we're going to use the flux to give us a little help. So one of the tricks that I do is I just take the desoldering braid and kind of loosen the braids a little bit. I scrunch it together to make the weave less tight, more kind of open like that. And then I'll just dip it in a tiny bit. You don't need a lot because this stuff can actually get a little messy. And you don't want a bunch of mess in here. This is a little bit faster. So dip that in there, put the braid on top of what you want to unsolder, and then put the soldering iron right on top of the braid and wait until it sucks it up, and you'll see the solder kind of climb the ladder of this desoldering braid here. Be careful not to get your fingers too close, it gets really hot. But then when you take it away, I don't know how much clarity you can see right there, but it is pretty clean from my standpoint right here. So that got rid of all that old solder from my standpoint right here. So that got rid of all that old solder. I'm going to do it again, give it a tiny little dip in here, dip in the flux pool, and then set it right down on top, wait till it sucks it up. Once you can see kind of the solder stop moving, then you know you got it all. You don't want to overheat these contacts either. That could be not a great thing. So pretty much every time I'm done with the soldering iron, by the way, I scrape it off to make sure the tip is as clean as possible. So almost done, just one more. Clip that guy off, scrunch it up, put it in the flux pool. Last one. Kind of blow that smoke away from my face as it's happening. That one didn't come out quite as clean, but that's all right. If we wanted to get picky, we could go back for more, but that's the ground. We're going to be just fine. So, as with everything, we want to tin all of our connections, just kind of pre-solder it. And now this is going to be fresh stuff that goes on top, kind of making all these 3 contacts really clean. So just cover the hole, make sure it's filled. You don't want to do too much, but enough. The ground is always a little hard to get it to kind of take, because it needs to be, sometimes the ground is, connected to the whole body. And so it takes a little bit more heat, a little bit more time to do it. Now, just so you know, this right here is the tip, this is the ring, and that's the sleeve of this, so this right here is the tip, and this right here is the ring, and then that is the sleeve. As far as it relates to, left and right, the tip is left, the ring is right, so you always remember ring right, and then both of these will share a ground, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So for wiring to a SP550-S, like I said earlier, I prefer to use this Mogami 2314 cable. It's thinner and kind of easier to work with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare both ends of this right now. So I'm going to start fresh. This one is just an example from before. Now these ones, you might want to leave a little extra room, and I'll show you why in a second, and then you can always trim them later. But so let's just take this. Let's take this guy on the biggest setting, I think number 12. And maybe 3/4 of an inch or something like that. Okay. Oh, it actually might be the next one in. There we go. Okay, do that one about the same. All right, we're not going to really worry right now about too much, but we're going to, since it is going to share the ground, we're going to pull the ground braid to the left on both of these. So use my helping hands there. And this one, same deal. It's going to go to the left. I'm not going to twist them yet, although you could. There's two different ways. You could twist them individually and then twist them together. That could be one method. That's not a bad one. You could also just put them together like this and then twist it. Either one works. Just make sure that there's no wires, you know, poking out, just in case you accidentally went too deep when you were stripping it and cut one of the wires. Make sure that those are not in the way or not going to hit another conductor. Now, for the stereo one, the ring is a lot shorter than the tip, you know, and the ground for these guys. And so you're going to you need to cut that one shorter. And it looks like both the tip and the ground need to be shorter anyway. Just a little bit. So a little bit there, a little bit there, and then on this middle one, kind of a bit more. Okay, so we're going to go like that. So that looks about right. So now we're going to strip all those. On this one, I think it's 26. It's a pretty small inner dimension there. Okay, twist it up. It's always good to twist them, or else sometimes they just get wily on you. Twist it all. We're going to tin it as usual. Clean the soldering iron. Okay, so now when we lay this down, kind of pre-form the wires as much as you can to make it lay flat naturally. But a little trick is you can kind of just do one at a time. But this looks pretty good. So I'm going to just do the tip. And then if for some reason they're not bent, once that's, you know, solid, then you can kind of re-bend this whole thing and bend it so that the next ones are ready to go. or laying flat against the contact as much as possible. Okay. So there you go. So now you've got tip, which is left, ring, which is right, and then both of them share that same ground. So you just have to remember that this one is the tip and that one's left. And this one, so it's actually kind of reversed from the way you're looking at it. This is left, even though it's on the right side. And this is right, even though it's on the left side. But this is kind of the tricky part that some people have an issue with. You want to fold this flap over, and then here's the trick. Where are my screws here? There we go. So take the top on, put in one side pretty much as loose as possible. Okay, so we'll start on the left side. Until it just starts to catch. Okay, it's kind of just there. Now what I'm going to do is, I have a separate screwdriver, but you could kind of use the same one. Take a flathead screwdriver, and while this side is open, put it right in the middle of that wire and shove it in as much as you can. You don't want to overdo it, you don't want to puncture it or anything. You're trying to make sure these two leads are kind of right in the middle of that groove. So now put in the other one. There you go, I was kind of misaligned. And then you kind of want to just go back and forth. So don't do one all the way. Just go back and forth. And if one is harder than another, then that means you probably need to, like, you know, shove this over one way or another. But this one's actually pretty good. I'm giving it quite a bit of pressure. So I'm alternating between the right screw and the left screw, just a few turns each, until they bottom out. Be careful not to strip the screw. Yep, so that's good. So that one's done. And you can see it is got two of those cables coming right out of there. It looks great. And it's a strong solder connection. And there's no gap in that bottom. We screwed it down tight. So now what I need to do is I need to take this stereo cable that we just made, this insert cable essentially, or the splitter cable rather, and feed it to the left out and the right out of the big sky. So I'm actually going to start, I basically, whenever I do these cables, I do the full length or a long length just to preserve as much of this as possible. There's other methods for it. If you measured it out more carefully, you could do it. But basically, I want to find the place where this cable is going to go through the board here. And so there's kind of one natural hole that I see that this could go through. And I'm going to take the end of this. It's a little tricky. Kind of bunch it up like that, and then push it through the hole. That's a good thing about these temple boards. There are a lot of different places to route cables through. So I found the hole. Now I'm just pulling all the slack out. I'm not too concerned about which is left and which is right, because I'm going to just test that at the end I'll show you, we'll do that with the multimeter. So for now, I'm actually going to leave this cable not plugged in so that I can test it in a minute. So I'm going to leave this cable hanging here. It's going to plug in into the return right under there, but for now it's going to sit here. And so this got pulled through. Now this needs to end up right here. So I'm going to find a spot for it underneath. Flip this thing upside down. It's going to end up over here. I want to avoid as much of the power as possible while still doing as short of run as possible, because don't want extra cable length introducing, you know, noise or signal loss or anything like that. So as short as possible. All right, so I found the spot that I'm going to come through, and that will allow for it not to run across any of this power here. So that'll be good. I'm just going to cross some of these low voltage power lines, which are not an issue. Again, a lot of this on the bottom will get cleaned up. I'll straighten things later and take the power and kind of fiddle with that a bit to clean things up. But for now, this is what we'll do. All right, so now we're up to the top. Flip it back over. And now we're going to route this through this gap. But this is going to go up and in here. I will find a nice spot to kind of put one of those zip tie things up in here and clean these cables up a bit. But one of them's going to go left and one of them's going to go right. Just like that. Just want to make sure that this has enough clearance to open. Shouldn't be a problem. There's plenty of slack. So for now, just cut both of them. Okay, so now we have most of our cable left over, and we didn't waste any. That's kind of a big part in doing all this, is preserving as much of the cable as you can. And so that method is a little more cumbersome, but it saves your cable. Now again, to figure out which is left and which is right, let's just put our multimeter on the sound mode and connect it to, I'm going to put one on the tip, and you can hold it with your finger like this. Kind of hold it to the tip and then try to poke it right on the inside. This is probably this one. Yep, so this is left. And then you can test it with the ring as well. You can hold the ring and make sure that's good. And then put it on the ground and make sure the ground on both of these is good. So that's how you would test that. So this is left. So I'll just solder that one up first. I'll kind of pull out some of the slack here. So now we're going to wire up a SP400 with the Mogami 2314 wire, which is pretty similar to the other wire, but just to give you some context for what this one looks like as opposed to the other one. So we just wired up our SP550-S, and then the left side went into, you know, one of the outputs, the left output on my Big Sky. Now this one's going to be the right output, and so they're the smaller cable. So you can use, to strip this one, you can use the 16 on here, and you just want to go a little bit like that. That actually might have been a little too much, but that's okay. So again, we want to make sure the orientation is right, so I'm going to just kind of dry fit the cable and pretend that this is kind of in my spot right here, and then I just want to make sure that this lays naturally, and I want this stuff, the braid, to go, in this case, to my right. So I'm going to orient all that stuff to the right. The cable sometimes really wants to part a certain way, just depending on where you snipped it, and so this particular cable didn't want to go that way. So this cable is a lot more flexible in general than the BTPA cable that I was showing you earlier. So this stuff is way easier to bend and move, and it has less of a preference as to where it sits. And so this one's not quite as important. So this one's the smallest. It's at 26. Take that off there. Gonna put this plug back in here. Same idea. So you just want to pre-tin all these connections right here. I might have done this a little too long, so I'll show you what you can do. Just do a little bit more of it. Tin a little bit more. And we'll just snip off the excess. So put a glob on there, glob on here. Not too much, but enough for it to cover it. As usual, cleaning the iron. Now I pulled out as much slack as possible, but we might have to kind of reorient this plug to get it to sit just right. So make a Y, just like that. And I really want to make sure that this sleeve goes all the way to the end. Actually, this cable is not too bad. I'm going to bend these down so that they naturally want to lay right there. Actually, those are going to be just fine. So lay them on top. Put the soldering iron on top, wait for it to firm up. Same thing on that side. And then kind of follow this up so it cools as you walk away from it. There's not too much excess, that is fine. Not my best work, but it will do. And that's how you solder up those plugs. These don't have nearly as much strain relief, so if you were overly concerned about it, you could put a piece of heat shrink right there, just to make sure that this latches down on it real tight. But you know, once these screws are in completely, it does have a tiny bit of strain relief. Might be enough, especially for things like this where it's really not going to be tugged on all that much. But there is a little bit in there. So now this can go in here after a little deoxit. You know, I had this big sky is original to me, and I bought it from the first batch. And same with the timeline, they're both first batch. And so they're a little old at this point. I think the timeline is 10 years old or something like that. And so this is a great thing to do for maintenance on any sort of older pedal. And you know, if you buy a pedal used, you don't know where it's been and what it's seen, and if it's an older pedal, you don't know exactly how old, so always a good idea to clean those jacks. So there you go, I gotta clean things up a little bit, but these are now all wired. So all my wet section is wired up and ready to go. Hey, so I was going to show you how to wire up a Switchcraft MIDI plug, those right angle ones. They could be a little bit tricky, but I actually finished all my MIDI and I'm out of MIDI plugs, so I don't have an extra one just to show you. But I did make a video years ago about how to do that, and my method hasn't changed, so I'll link to that in the description or just put a card up somewhere, so go check that out. But that's the end of the wiring section of this Pedalboard series. Again, check out the other videos. I invite you to my website, thetoneshepard.com, and you can follow me on Instagram at thetoneshepard for some devotional resources and other resources related to the praise and worship community that might benefit you. But thanks for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, would you please like it? And if you want more of this kind of content, just subscribe and you'll be notified when it drops. Thanks again. We'll see you in the next video.